In 2018, I made a reaction video about the movie Saturday Night Fever. In that video, which I invite you to check out on my YouTube channel, I examined visual and narrative details in Saturday Night Fever to make the case that what I had previously dismissed as some disco movie from the late 1970s is in fact a compelling story with a great deal of subtlety, wit, and emotional depth. This is also a reaction video, but in service of a particular point, that the movie I'm going to talk about is the most creative and accurate dramatization of what it's like to be a fiction writer. Now, I'm not saying this was the intention of the filmmakers. I'm not arguing that the way I interpret this movie is the right way or the only way to interpret it. This is simply what I saw when I saw Naked Lunch. I want to begin by making a point that I'm going to return to by the end of this video. The 1991 movie Naked Lunch, screenplay and direction by David Cronenberg, is inspired by the iconic 1959 novel Naked Lunch by William S. Burroughs. The movie is not an adaptation because Burroughs' novel, which is far from a conventional narrative, is impossible to straightforwardly adapt to the screen. As I say, I'll come back to this point. This video assumes that you've seen the movie Naked Lunch. If you haven't, I suggest you watch the movie first. Ready? Let's go. At the start of the movie Naked Lunch, our protagonist says that he is not a writer. By the end of the movie, he says that he is a writer. How our protagonist gets from point A to point B, how he becomes a writer, is what this movie is about. William Lee is a recovering drug addict living somewhere in New York City in 1953. Things are good for Bill. He's off drugs, he has a regular job as an exterminator, he has an apartment, he has a wife, and he has friends, Martin and Hank. Martin and Hank are aspiring writers, and over coffee they suggest to Bill that writing pornography might be a good way to pick up some money. Bill dismisses the idea, saying that he gave up writing when he was 10. Writing was, Bill says, too dangerous, and he doesn't elaborate on what is so dangerous about writing. We'll find out. Martin and Hank embody two approaches to creative writing. Hank is a disciple of the maxim, first thought, best thought, while Martin has an almost obsessive need to revise, to find the perfect word. In this scene, Bill physically positions himself between Martin and Hank, in the interzone, if you will, between the two. Part of what may be dangerous about writing is negotiating the space between these two approaches, between left brain and right brain, instinct and control. A good writer, a successful writer, needs both. We learn, at the same time Bill does, that his wife Joan is still a drug addict. She is shooting up pyrethrum, the powder Bill uses to exterminate roaches. It's a very literary high, she tells him, a Kafka high. You feel like a bug. This, of course, is a reference to Franz Kafka's story, Metamorphosis, in which a young man wakes up one morning to find that he's been inexplicably transformed into a giant bug. Now, there's some dispute as to what kind of bug he changes into. Some translations have it as a cockroach, while others contend he becomes some kind of beetle. Bill Lee himself will undergo a metamorphosis in this movie, from non-writer to writer. And remember, he says he gave up writing at age 10, which in males is the threshold of the metamorphosis of puberty. Joan encourages Bill to try ingesting pyrethrum himself, which he does, and he doesn't seem to need much convincing. Maybe Bill wants to feel closer to his wife, who seems to only care about getting high, or maybe he himself is bored or curious or has an inner urge for a fix. Regardless, from the moment Bill tries pyrethrum, we can no longer be certain that anything that happens in this movie is actually happening. From here on in, we are between reality and hallucination, between fact and invention, in the interzone between the world as the writer finds it and the world as the writer makes it. Bill's case officer tells him that Interzone Incorporated is an organization based in Interzone, a port in North Africa, a refuge, he says, for the mongrel scum of the world. Now that sounds a lot like Casablanca, the fictional Casablanca of the movies. Because there is no actual place in our real world called Interzone, but there is a place called Africa, Interzone is a fiction grounded in reality. But because we cannot be sure of the reality of anything in this movie once Bill Lee takes pyrethrum, Interzone, in this movie, may not be an actual place. It may be a state of mind, a dimension of existence. Perhaps Bill Lee, in the reality of this movie, shot and killed his wife and lit out for North Africa. Or maybe Bill just left his wife, imagined that he shot her in a fantasy of finality, and is still living in New York City, but in a different dimension of perception. We, the viewers of the movie, do not know, and that puts us in an interzone between certainty and uncertainty. Note that at the start of the movie, a title card tells us we are in New York City in the year 1953, but when Bill arrives in Interzone, there is no title card telling us Interzone, North Africa. If there's no title card, I submit that we haven't left New York City. When Bill and Eve Cloquet have breakfast together in Interzone, the scenery in the windows behind them suggests that they are overlooking Central Park. When they are driving in Eve's car at night, they pass what looks like Middle Eastern people, and then the entrance to a New York City subway. When Bill visits the Frosts' home, he says it looks like a restaurant he knows in New York City. This fits into a larger pattern of elements from the real world popping up in what appears to be a fictional world. We see that Bill confuses a syringe with his ticket to Interzone, and a collection of pills in a pillowcase to be the mangled remains of a writing machine. The voice of Bill's co-worker Edward at the extermination company is the voice of his case officer. The detectives Hauser and O'Brien resurface as the guards at the border of Annexing. The young Kiki appears in the bar in New York and again in Interzone. Dr. Benway has an office in Manhattan, but also appears in Interzone. And of course, we have the two Jones. This is a dramatization of what happens all the time in the act of writing fiction. Actual people and events turn up in the fictional world, in novels, in short stories, and plays, with different roles, different personalities, and different names. So it may not matter whether we are really in New York City or in North Africa. To borrow a line from Ernest Hemingway, the naked lunch is a movable feast. The fiction writer takes life, subjects it to a metamorphosis of fictionalization, and in so doing brings something new to life. Something new is made. After Bill Lee has his first encounter with his case officer, whom he kills, he hurries home to Joan and tells her that they have to get out of town. "We've been made," he tells her. The movie Naked Lunch has many film noir elements in it, in visuals and in dialogue, but we shouldn't overlook this remark from Bill. To be made is to have your cover blown. That is, people find out who and what you are. I submit that in Bill's case, he's been made by the insect agents of control in the respect that he's been identified as a writer, posing as an ordinary Joe. This is what fiction writers do. They go undercover in their daily lives to gather observations, perceptions, and experience to write about. If such writers are made, outed as writers, then the people around them may act differently, either becoming more guarded or more extravagant, knowing that they may end up metamorphosed in a short story or a novel. That's one of the dangerous aspects of being a writer and knowing a writer. According to the case officer, Joan Lee's cover is her identity as Bill Lee's wife. She is, so the case officer says, a giant centipede working for Interzone Incorporated. Hers is not the only cover in this movie. Fidelia's cover is being a housemaid for Tom and Joan Frost, when really she is a witch and the head of a coven. And under that cover, she is Dr. Benway, whose other cover is the amiable and seemingly naive doctor in New York City. Yves Cloquet's cover is as an urbane sophisticate, when really he is a monstrous sexual predator. Very few people in this movie are what they seem. Remember Joan Lee saying that ingesting pyrethrum produces a literary high, which she defines as feeling like a bug? A bug is also part of an undercover agent's arsenal. A bug is a mechanical device, allowing you to listen in on and possibly record other people's conversation. This is what fiction writers do all the time. They listen, they record, then they turn what they hear into writing. That is the literary high, being a bug. As the movie Naked Lunch progresses, it becomes more like a film noir movie whose plot is very hard to follow. We may struggle to make sense of who or what mugwumps are, what the black meat is, and who's producing it, and where Dr. Benway fits into all of this. All this may be the result of Bill Lee's increasing drug addiction and hallucinations, but I think on a deeper level, this is a dramatization of fiction writing playing a more dominant role in his life and his conception of who he is. Seeing yourself as an agent obligated to file reports about a vast international drug conspiracy is certainly more interesting than seeing yourself as a lowly exterminator who punches the clock day after day after day. And yet, there is something dangerous about writing. The more inventive and creative a fictional world becomes, the closer it can get to deep and painful truths. The more that Bill writes, the more that he writes reports for control that eventually become chapters in a novel called Naked Lunch, the more that certain aspects of his personality emerge, most notably his bisexuality. Early on in the movie, the young man whom we will know in Interzone as Kiki asks Bill Lee if he is a faggot. Bill is evasive. He's not a faggot by nature, he says, but then he allows, I wouldn't say faggot, but circumstances have forced me to consider the possibility. Later in Interzone, over breakfast with Yves Cloquet, whose very name suggests evening and a cloak of disguise, Bill says that the Lees have always been a family of perverts. He tells the story of Bobo, a local drag queen who meets an ugly end. By the end of the movie, we see Bill in a loving embrace with Kiki, and there is no embarrassment, no anxiety over being attracted to him, as well as to Joan Frost. The more Bill writes, the more what is within comes out. Remember that when Bill Lee first meets Dr. Benway, the doctor tells him that the cure for addiction to bug powder, or pyrethrum, operates like an agent who believes his own cover story, but who's in there, hiding in a larval state, just waiting for the proper moment to hatch out. This connects with the story Bill tells later of the talking anus, an inner voice, an inner urge that slowly takes over the body. The anus needs to be heard. What is writing but a need to be heard? But Bill said that writing was dangerous, and the danger is in the experience of naked lunch. The author William S. Burroughs has defined naked lunch to mean the moment when you realize what is at the end of your fork. Naked lunch is an awakening. It is revelation. It is achieving a deeper or higher level of awareness or consciousness, and the results may not be pleasant. The truth comes with a price. Bill Lee goes through a lot in this movie, but he only cries twice. Once in the marketplace, when the sight of a centipede on a stick inspires some kind of revulsion in him, the awareness of naked lunch, and again at the very end of the movie. The detectives Hauser and O'Brien appear to be investigating the case of the missing bug powder, so they take Bill in for questioning, and it is there that Bill first encounters a talking bug, his case officer sent by Control to give Bill instructions. Kill his wife. One way to interpret this is that the bug is an imagined externalization of Bill's own desire to murder his spouse, Joan Lee. Bill cannot psychologically accept or deal with this desire, so under the influence of drugs, he hallucinates that he is given permission to do it by some external authority. Now, if Bill kills Joan, he's just following orders. I don't think that's what's happening, though. We see no evidence in this movie that Bill hates his wife, is fed up with her, or wishes that she was dead. I'll grant you, Bill Lee's affect in this movie is pretty flat, but we don't have any indication that Joan Lee is pushing her husband to the point where he wants to kill her. Could the instructions, "kill your wife," mean something else? Later on in the movie, the writer Tom Frost tells Bill that he has been killing his wife Joan slowly for years. Not on the level of conscious intention, he says. And when he explains, something strange happens. Tom's lips move, but he is saying something else. He says he is killing his wife by hiring a witch as a maid, through medicines and drugs, or undermining her self-esteem, all without Joan realizing it. Bill appears amused by this, and I would argue that his reaction arises from his discovery, as someone developing their abilities as a writer, that he can read and interpret the subtext of what people are saying and doing. He sees past their cover. He is developing a writer's perspicacity. I would say further that when Tom Frost says he's been killing his wife, what he really means is that he's been writing about her. How is writing about someone killing them? Now, I'm interrupting my own video with a brief public service announcement. I happen to have an MFA in creative writing, and I write fiction when I'm not making videos like this. When I say that Naked Lunch is the best movie I know about what it's like to be a fiction writer, I'm speaking metaphorically. I am not suggesting that fiction writers need to take drugs, abandon their jobs, shoot their wives, and embark on some kind of hallucinogenic dark night of the soul. None of that nurtures creativity or productivity or makes you more of a writer. Now, that point to some people may be obvious, But other people who seek to emulate the writer's persona of, say, Hunter S. Thompson or Ernest Hemingway may cling to an outdated, discredited notion that drugs and alcohol help a writer with his or her craft. They most definitely do not. And on that point, I refer you to an excellent book called The Thirsty Muse by Tom Dardis. I believe it is true that writing with creativity and insight involves an altering of one's perception or even consciousness, but there are ways to achieve that without narcotics or alcohol. As Tom Dardis argues in his book, the more heavily writers such as Eugene O'Neill, William Faulkner, Ernest Hemingway, and F. Scott Fitzgerald became abusers of alcohol, the worse their writing became. Okay, back to Naked Lunch. The movie Naked Lunch has several scenes that are disturbing visually, but none more so than when Bill Lee and Joan engage in their William Tell routine. Some background here. William Tell is a folk hero from Switzerland, an expert marksman with a crossbow. When William Tell refuses to bow before a wicked overlord, he is compelled to shoot an arrow into an apple placed atop the head of his own son. He makes the shot. In real life, in 1951, the author William S. Burroughs was charged with shooting and killing his wife, whose name was Joan Vollmer. The shooting took place in Mexico City, and Burroughs gave conflicting accounts as to what happened. He either dropped his handgun, which discharged and killed his wife, or he and his wife were engaging in what they saw as a party trick, where Burroughs would shoot a glass off of Joan Vollmer's head. Burroughs escaped custody in Mexico and never did any jail time for the death of his wife, which may or may not have been an accident. If we believe that author William S. Burroughs murdered his wife in real life, we may believe what we see in the movie Naked Lunch, that Bill Lee murders Joan. But let's look at what happens in the movie. After Bill Lee goes to see Dr. Benway to obtain a remedy for his addiction to bug powder, he comes home to his apartment to find that Joan is having sex with Hank, while Martin watches and reads his poetry. Seeing this, Bill does not react as a normal husband would. He goes without a word into another part of the apartment. Maybe Bill has walked in on this kind of scene before. Maybe he thinks he's hallucinating, or maybe he is totally cut off from his inner emotional life. We do not know. Joan comes into the bedroom and apologizes, rather half-heartedly, saying that she and Hank were bored and that neither of them achieved sexual climax. An ordinary husband might be doubly offended by this, to know that his wife pursues adultery with such indifference and nonchalance. But again, Bill doesn't get angry, and he doesn't say that he's hurt. He merely says, "I think it's time for our William Tell routine." Joan evidently knows what he means by this, because she stands erect and puts a drinking glass on her head. Bill aims, shoots, and by all appearances, Joan is dead. And I say appearances for a reason. In this scene, Bill refers to the William Tell routine as if he and Joan have done this before. All Bill has to do is say the words William Tell routine, and Joan obediently puts the glass on her head. If this scene were taking place in the real world, this would be an insanely dangerous thing to do. Even if you hit the glass, it would shatter and probably injure Joan's scalp or her face. Sitting at the vanity, Bill cannot be more than 6 feet from Joan, but he misses the glass entirely. Now, maybe he is a terrible shot. I'm not a ballistics expert, but if Joan is that close to Bill, and he shoots her in the head with what looks like a 32mm pistol, I would think the bullet would go straight through her skull and through the window behind her, and we'd hear the sound of breaking glass. We do not. I question whether Bill Lee, in this movie, kills his wife at all. stay with me on this. We see this scene once before Bill even buys a typewriter, and we see it again at the end of the movie. At the end of the movie, Bill Lee is driving a vehicle that looks like a cross between a bus and a tank. It's an in-between vehicle with a vaguely beetle-like curve to its body. Bill arrives at the border of a territory called Annexing. The two guards ask Bill what his business is, and Bill replies that he's a writer. As proof, he shows the guards a pen, but the guards are unsatisfied. They demand that Bill Lee show them that he is a writer. "Write something," they say. Whereupon Bill Lee turns to Joan Frost, who is asleep behind him. She is bleary-eyed and disheveled, looking very much like Joan Lee. Bill tells her, "We're almost there," and he adds, "It's time for our William Tell routine." As obediently as Joan Lee, Joan Frost puts the glass atop her head, and Bill shoots her. We see Joan collapse, and the guards tell Bill, "Welcome to Annexing," and there are tears in Bill's eyes. We do not know if these are tears of sadness, tears of happiness, or the cathartic release that comes with the realization of naked lunch, the truth of things. The word annex as a verb has two meanings. It can mean to append something to a document, or it could mean to appropriate something for oneself. In the act of writing, writers do both. Writers appropriate for themselves experience, sensations, observations, either their own or someone else's, and they put them into their creative writing. Thus, annexing it, they annex words to a document. They add something to a document. Now let's be clear. I am not suggesting that creativity is inherently violent, or that a good metaphor for the creative act is shooting a woman in the head. What I am saying is that to write creatively about Joan is to create a fiction version of her. And to do that, Bill must figuratively kill the real Joan. To kill someone is to take their life. And this is what a fiction writer does. The writer takes life and transforms it into art. It appears then that only genuine writers may cross the border into Annexing. It's not enough just to have a writer's equipment, a pen or a typewriter. You have to do the writing. Put another way, being a writer is in the execution. So what ultimately is the William Tell routine? It's writing. Bill Lee's name is William. To write is to tell a story, and the routine is the disciplined, continual practice of putting words to paper. In the routine of writing, William tells. In the annals of Beat Generation literature, the most famous and recognized work is Jack Kerouac's On the Road. Coming in a close second, I'd say, is the poem Howl by Allen Ginsberg, and in a close tie for second, but coming in third, is William S. Burroughs' Naked Lunch. I put Naked Lunch third because if people haven't read Howl, they may at least recognize its opening line. I saw the greatest minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked. And odds are, they've only heard of the book Naked Lunch and have not tried to read it. And yet, it's an iconic book. Even English majors, I think, would be hard-pressed to name another title by William S. Burroughs, such as Queer or The Adding Machine. In order for David Cronenberg to make a movie of the book Naked Lunch, he couldn't do a straightforward adaptation. He needed to kill the original book, take its life, subject it to creative metamorphosis, and make his own piece of artwork. So the movie Naked Lunch, which is about the writing of a book called Naked Lunch, is about the only way that you can write a movie about a book called Naked Lunch. The film is not only about creative writing, it is itself an example of the type of creative writing process that is its own subject. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the process of investigating what the movie Naked Lunch could mean. If you have thoughts of your own, please share them with me in the comments to this video. Thanks very much for listening. My name is Tim Lemire.